Hi, I'm Howard Kroplick. I'm co-president of the Roslyn Landmark Society. Today we're going to be meeting with a class of architectural students from the Pratt Institute, and we'll take them through the history of the building. We'll talk about the different phases of the restoration, funding of the project, and also future use of it. So what's the significance and the history of this building? John Robinson was the first person who got a grant in here for this building to build a grist mill in 1698. So we're talking about over 300 years ago. And a grist mill was built on this location in 1701 to about 1709, right here. And why was this a good location? The water. And here, you can see, you can hear it, constant flow of water. That's 24/7. So it made it natural for a grist mill. And there was a water wheel where this concrete basin was. That's where the water wheel was. And that in the future where it's going to be. So this particular building was built somewhere between 1715 and 1741. And it's a rare surviving Dutch frame water mill. Okay, so it used old school technology here, Dutch framing here. And you can see it on the different columns there. And the one thing that's really unusual too is that each of the columns and the beams have Roman numerals to match. As I said, this was the main building here. It was the only building in the 1700s, and the rest of the village really grew around the grist mill. What you're seeing in here was called a mill dam. So they filled this in to separate Hempstead Harbor from the different ponds. I love this picture here. This was shot in about, I'd say 1890, and it shows the grist mill, what it looked like. You got the horse and carriage coming down the mill dam road. And if you look across the street from the grist mill, you could actually see the pond, where this parking lot is. This was actually part of the pond. You can see here in the 1890s, the grist mill was level to the street. Until about 2020, the grist mill was actually, the first floor was about 8 feet lower than the road. And people would always come up and say, what happened to the grist mill? Did it sink? Didn't sink. It was the road was built up. When they filled this in, they made it higher. So for years, to get into the grist mill, you had to actually step down. We fixed that when we put a new foundation in. So as I said, it was a heavy wooden structural frame. You'll see the beams in there. That's what's still historic about it. Those beams go back to the 1700s. So it was constructed with a post and beam joinery using Dutch framing. Another claim to fame on this was that in April 24th, 1790, the owner of the grist mill, Hendrik Onderdonk, met with a pretty famous person, President George Washington. Came and had breakfast up the hill there at Hendrik's home, which is still there now. It's Hendrik's Tavern, a restaurant. And he had breakfast. He didn't sleep there, but he was had breakfast, and where he was, in his diary, he said he was well entertained by the owner of a grist mill and paper mill. So this grist mill stood for about 150 years. It was an active grist mill, which is kind of amazing. You know, the center of activity, all the villagers would come in here, the farmers would come here, take the wheat, be made into grain, flour, till about the late 1890s, where grist mill technology became outdated and the building shut down. So it was laid vacant for a couple of years, and then the relatives of William Cullen Bryant, the poet, the civic leader who lived nearby in Roslyn Harbor, said, we want to restore this building and make it a museum to show what this grist mill was. So about 1916, they began to restore this as a grist mill. They realized right away that they needed something else, so it became a museum/tea house. So it operated as a tea house from about 1920 to about 1974. And in 1976, it was transferred, I think as part of the bicentennial, to Nassau County. who became the owners of the grist mill, with plans to once again restore it as a museum, as an educational center. Nassau County had great plans for it, but never got enough money to really generate the actual restoration and construction. The Roslyn Landmark Society, our mission is really to preserve the history and the historic buildings here in the community. So we took it on in about 2015 to raise the funds that are needed for the restoration. So 2015, we got involved. We put together a Roslyn Grist Mill committee to figure out how to fund this. And we received initial grant of $500,000 from Gary Charitable Trust. The Garys were the people who founded our organization, and they left a nice charitable trust. And so we were off and running. We got matching money from New York State and received money from Nassau County as well. Here's the background on the building. It's owned by Nassau County. Roslyn Landmark Society, we have a contract with them to really manage the restoration. The restoration architects are John G. Wade Associates, and they're one of the leading consultants in historic preservation architecture. Our construction manager is Cole Construction. They're located in Vermont. Why Vermont, right? There's not a lot of timber framers here on Long Island. Our manager is Chris Cole, is located up in Vermont. He has a very trusty supervisor, Don Krug. Don, there he goes. But a lot of our workers we ship in. So they're from Vermont and Massachusetts. You really need a lot of expertise in this type of building. The size here, it's 25 feet in width, and 50 feet in length. So it's a relatively small building. The weight of the building is about 78 tons. And it used to be much more than that, but we removed the concrete roof, we removed the concrete floors. The frame structure is 15 bents of white oak timber. The Roman numerals from north to south. The bents are spaced about 3 feet, 6 inches apart. So this building was really well constructed to last, and it has, for over 300 years. So you can see those notches over here on the columns. So that's again indicative of the Dutch architecture. The millstones, we have the millstones there because the only reason the millstones have survived is because they're so heavy, nobody ever stole them, right? So we have 4 French burr stones, 42 inches in diameter. And we have an overshoot water wheel that where this concrete basin is, which we're going to have to move, that's where the water wheel is going to go. In 1916, William Cullen Bryant's relatives were very concerned about fire. Cedarmere, Bryant's original home, burnt down in 1905. So they decided that during the restoration, they would use concrete. So they had a concrete roof, they had concrete floors. The outside of the building was concrete, but it was made to look like wood. In part of our restoration in 2020 and 2021 to 2022, we removed the heavy concrete. So the phase 1 began in November 2019. 5 years goes by quick. And the first phase was really to stabilize the building and put a new foundation in. The building was being held up by wooden posts, primarily put together by Nassau County in the 1990s. So the building swayed a little bit with the wind, but it didn't fall. So to give you an idea about phase 1 here, it began in November 2018 when we got the funding, and it was completed last year in August. And this was really stabilization of the building. We restored timber frames, and you'll see inside, it'll be a little clearer. See these columns over here, some of them are original, some of them are brand new, that had to be replaced, and some of them are hybrids, where we took the old and we fortified it with new beams, new wood. So that work was done up in Vermont. We took the beams that needed to be restored, and we shipped it up to Vermont. Importantly, we put a new foundation in, and you can see here the technology. We raised the building, and these wood pilings here, this is technology that dates back to the 1800s. It was done by a company, Wolf Movers of Pennsylvania. It's a combination of Amish and Mennonites who do a lot of house raisings and moving. So because of this, we were able to put a new concrete foundation on the bottom of that. And then we lowered the building back. But instead of lowering it 8 feet below the street level, we now have it at street level. With the completion of phase 1, we began phase 2 last year, about a year ago. And this part again is really having the building itself stand on its own. Until this point, we had steel beams that when we raised the building, those steel beams raised the building. We left the steel beams in until we could get the timber frame totally fortified so that whole building could stand. And so we removed the concrete floors, we removed the concrete roof, the concrete siding from the sides, and we started building it back so that the building right now, as you see it, is totally being held together by a wooden frame. So we removed the steel beams, we lowered it down, and it's pretty stable. So now the building itself, you can see the new foundation on the bottom there, concrete. We're going to use stones. The original stones you can see over here from the foundation, those are going to be on the outside there, so we'll never see the concrete too. So the objective here is to make the building look as much as the original as it can be. So that's phase 2. We have a couple of pictures here. You can see the workers replacing the steel beam. This is bent 15, and this one that was facing the mill dam, Old Northern Boulevard now, was the most damaged too. So we could not repair it. So what we did was we removed it, and this is a new beam in there as well. And we have an appreciation of how they must have built this in the 1700s. Here we're using modern day equipment to move these heavy beams. It must have been something to watch them move these, 2 to 4 ton beams. They put them in place back in the 1700s. But you can see here is our workers doing timber joinery and large beams being installed in the new floor. And we're using the same type of technology. We're not using metal. It's all wood pins and joints. We're getting a lot of support from New York State and the Department of Preservation, and they want this to look as original as possible. So we want to have it look original, but we're also obligated under our grants to do that. We're still in phase 2 right now. The next phase is the roof. Is that we're going to put the rafters back in, and you can see the first rafter that shows you in place what it's going to look like. So it shows you really what the design of the building is going to look like. So that's exciting that we're going to get this roof up so the second floor will be set. We're hoping that's going to be done this year. In the spring, we're going to put the shingles on the top of the roof. The exterior siding, doors and windows are scheduled to be completed in the spring. And then the interior fit up, including flooring materials, the educational centerpiece, safety and security, all be done in the summer. The most significant part of the building here are these beams over here. And you can see some are new, some are old, and some are hybrids.
What had happened was All the posts were removed at one point and brought up to Vermont and restored by Jan Lewandowski, who is the timber frame restoration professional on the job, an expert at that. And then they were brought back and reinstalled. And he did a really fantastic job on this. I could show you what had happened on some of these timbers. If you look over here, all these posts were removed and only portions of the original material remained. You can actually see a splice from here to here, where this is original material from the 1700s. And then he introduced new material so it will become structurally sound. As far as the tie beams, which are basically the floor beams, these were in great shape. We did replace 3 of them, and you can see the difference. There's 15 bents in this building. So the way that the Dutch built was they would frame a bent on the ground and stand it up. So there's 15 in this particular building. So this tie beam here, number 3, was replaced. You can see that it looks newer. And this one, number 5, was replaced. And also number 15 was replaced.
You can see beam 15, which is the first one, is totally new. Okay, but you can see how heavy these beams are. These are big, thick beams throughout. Over here, this is called the husk frame over here, which is going to be the husk frame. The water wheel is where that concrete basin was.
Which probably is the most historical part of the building. And that held all the gears for the grinding down of the wheat, the stones. It was actually a separate timber frame to its own within the building.
You really wanted to keep it separate, so this whole building with these giant 2-ton stones are turning around, so the whole building doesn't vibrate as well.
And that was disassembled in June of 2019, and hopefully we will have that restored at some point.
Don, do you want to show them what these beams over here, the work? We just finished up these. These are relatively new.
Yeah, this was a major repair in the restoration. This is tie beam number 10, which was replaced completely. And then 11, 12, 13 was replaced, 14, 15. And this header was reintroduced, which was not existing when we first came here. It was just really fascinating to watch these timber framers form this with traditional tools. And it all came together. And honestly, I was laying awake at night worrying about this coming together, but these guys really made it look easy, and it was just beautiful to watch.
And you can see the wood pins are holding together the columns and the beams itself. So just the way they were originally. And what we're standing on here before was the concrete floor. You know, and right there in the corner was where we found the message in the bottle. And when we were removing the concrete floor, amazingly, we found a bottle with messages in it and coins. And this was a big discovery. So we pulled it out. It was all written in Italian. It said, "I am Roman Caporelli. I was working on the grist mill and I invented the concrete design here to make like wood. Please remember me, Roman."
So if you notice, every other post has a diagonal brace, and that's the way that the Dutch had framed this building here. And it's repeated down below too.
And these columns are what, about 3 feet apart?
42 inch on center. That's a typical Dutch framing technique.
And remember, this was a tea house for a good 50 years. And we found there was a veranda on the outside there, and we have found maybe about 25 bottles houses were excavated it dating back into the 20s as well. So we have a whole collection of rare beer bottles and wine bottles associated with the grist mill as when it was an operating tea house. Let's show them this beam over here. And you can see here the Roman numeral. It's pretty clear. This is 13.
Unfortunately, we couldn't save this.
So you can see this is a brand new beam that had to be, it was really amazing to fit it in. First of all, you had to take out the old beam, and then you had to fit it in here and make sure that the weight of that floor above us, the roof, was going to be stabilized.
The second floor is original, and that's why we have that temporary roof up there, that flat roof. Instead of taking this all apart, the architects decided just for us to build that temporary roof to protect this floor.
Right, so this is original flooring over here? Over here, yeah. No, I don't think we have insulation at all. Again, it's going to look like what it looked like in the 1700s. Oh, here are the plans.
Yeah. So from an architectural standpoint, because as I was saying, the original rafters were determined unengineerable, they're adding new rafters in between, not even sistering up, in between each bent. So at the end of the day, there's going to be 60 rafters over there.
All right, so you're going to have old and new combined, but it's the new is actually going to hold the roof.
It's quite the project.
It's a small building, but you really have to do a lot of engineering and a lot of design work here to actually do it, if you want to do it right. And again, we had to do this meeting the standards of historic preservation, too. So there were some restrictions of what you could do, what you can't do, too. So it's a really challenge mapping out how do you restore a building like this. We wouldn't be able to do this unless you raise money. So we're joined here today with Craig Westeergard, who was president of the Roslyn Landmark Society when this project began. And so through Craig, he generated really the first funding and the support from the Gary Charitable Trust so this project to begin. To date, we've raised $6.5 million for this project. Why so expensive? Well, it's again, you got a lot of expertise in here. You have workers with timber framing background coming down from Vermont and Massachusetts. And you also pay prevailing wages because these are grants. So someone hammering nails over here is making over $100 an hour. Ultimately, this is going to be a $9 million project by the time it's done. But where did we get the money from? You got to get money from every place. Charitable trusts, foundations, the Gardner Foundation gave us money. New York State, we have 3 $500,000 grants. We had a match campaign where we raised over $1 million for it. Nassau County has given about $500,000, and they've committed $2 million more for the project that we just need to get bonded so we can get the money. And you can get money out of the unusual places. Remember who I said was the first person to get a grant here? John Robinson. About 2 years ago, a gentleman calls me up and said, "My name is Professor Tim Bester, and I'm a relative of John Robinson. And my family built the first grist mill here. Said, can I visit it and see what's going on?" And Professor Bester came and saw the building. He was very impressed with all the work that's being done. And he goes, "Well, how's funding going?" I said, "Well, we're doing okay, but we're going to need more money." And I told him, he said, "We're going to need at least another $2 million. And he looked around and he said, I think I could help." And Professor Bester gave $250,000 for the project. So you never know. So like I said, we still need about $2 million. We have that funding, we hope, from Nassau County. And we put in another grant to New York State this year. We'll here in December. Again, we got support from the federal government. Congressman Tom Suozzi, when he was leaving Congress, he's back now. The last thing he did as a congressman was he got us a $500,000 Save America's Treasures grant. And just last week, we received our first reimbursements from this $500,000 grant, and we celebrated it right here last week with Congressman Suozzi, gave him a certificate of appreciation as well. So we have all kinds of support. We have local support. The village supports us here. We take over part of the village parking lot for our construction crew too. Craig's also a trustee of the village, so he keeps them informed of what's going on. Nassau County, they're the owners, they're supportive. So it's, again, to get that much money, you really need to get it from a whole bunch of sources as well. So finally, we have a banner. So we have an appreciation of everybody who is supporting this, our sponsors as well. We have Raleigh Motors over here, our big dealership over here, good supporter of the Roslyn Landmark Society. So constantly important to reinforce community support for the project. So when this project is done, and we hope it's going to be done soon, this will become an educational center, be a resource, really talking about the history of grist mills on Long Island, the history of the village of Roslyn, and the really dynamic history of the grist mill itself, how it was the center of economic activity here in the village, and really was the first major commercial building in the village. So we see this as an important educational center, and it will also be a tourist attraction for Long Island.